The photograph sat in a shoebox for 31 years. Tucked between Christmas cards and elementary school report cards in Linda Chen's attic in Ann Arbor, Michigan, the Polaroid showed something that should have been impossible. Her sister, Diane, smiling at a county fair, cotton candy in hand, standing next to a man whose face had been carefully scratched out. The date stamp on the photo read August 14, 1982. Diane Chen disappeared on August 15, 1982. For 3 decades, Linda had assumed this was just another family photo. One of the last pictures taken before her 17-year-old sister vanished from the Washtenaw County Fair. The scratched-out face? Linda had always figured it was damage from years in storage, or maybe Diane herself had defaced it during some teenage drama. But in 2013, when Linda finally decided to digitize old family photos, she took the Polaroid to a specialty shop in Detroit that offered photo restoration services. The technician used advanced imaging software to reconstruct scratched and damaged photographs. What emerged from beneath those deliberate scratch marks made Linda's blood run cold. The face belonged to Robert James Morrison, a volunteer coordinator for the Washtenaw County Fair in 1982, a respected member of the community, a youth mentor at the local Methodist church, a man who'd helped organize search parties when Diane disappeared, who'd comforted the Chen family, who'd attended Diane's memorial service 2 years later when she was declared legally dead. A man who'd been hiding in plain sight for 31 years. But here's the twist that would crack open not just Diane's case, but expose a predator who'd operated across 3 Michigan counties for 2 decades. Robert Morrison hadn't just killed Diane Chen. He'd photographed all of them, every single victim, standing next to him at fairs, festivals, church events, smiling, unsuspecting, hours before they vanished. And he'd kept the photographs in an album in his basement, organized by date, labeled with first names only, like a hunter's trophy collection. The second twist? Morrison's wife had known about the album for 15 years before Diane's photograph was restored. She'd found it, understood what it meant, and chosen to stay silent, until the day Linda Chen walked into the Ann Arbor Police Department with that restored photograph. Because sometimes the most terrifying part of a murder isn't the killer. It's the person who knew and did nothing. Before we dive into 31 years of investigation, false leads, and a conspiracy of silence that protected a serial killer, I need to hear from you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from and your gut reaction. If you discovered someone you loved was protecting a murderer, what would you do? And if you're new to Untold Cold Case Files, hit that subscribe button right now. We investigate cases that time tried to bury, and we expose every layer of truth, no matter who it destroys in the process. This Michigan cold case is going to show you that sometimes evil doesn't hide in shadows. Sometimes it volunteers at the fair, sings in the church choir, and shakes your hand at your sister's funeral. Stay with me. Ypsilanti, Michigan, in the summer of 1982, was quintessential Middle America. Located about 40 miles west of Detroit, nestled between Ann Arbor's university sophistication and the blue-collar grit of the auto industry corridor, Ypsilanti was a working-class town of 24,000 souls. Eastern Michigan University brought students and energy. The old downtown featured brick storefronts, a historic water tower, and the kind of main street where everyone knew everyone. Summer in Ypsilanti meant the Washtenaw County Fair, an annual tradition dating back to 1847. For 1 week every August, the fairgrounds off Bunton Road came alive with carnival rides, livestock exhibits, demolition derbies, and funnel cake stands. It was wholesome, family-friendly Americana, the kind of place where parents sent their teenagers with $20 and instructions to be home by 10. The Chen family embodied the American immigrant success story. David Chen had emigrated from Taiwan in 1961, working as an engineer at Ford Motor Company. His wife, Mary, worked as a seamstress from their home, taking in alterations and custom orders. They'd raised 3 daughters in a modest ranch house on Forest Avenue, Linda, the oldest, 20 in 1982, Diane, 17, and young Amy, 12. "We had rules," Linda would later tell investigators, her voice thick with remembered grief. But they weren't unreasonable. Be home on time. Call if plans change. Diane was responsible. She'd never worried us before. Diane Chen was a senior at Ypsilanti High School, honor student, member of the swim team, planning to attend the University of Michigan in the fall to study biology. She had her mother's delicate features, her father's analytical mind, and a shy smile that lit up when she talked about marine biology and her dream of studying ocean conservation. August 14, 1982 was a Saturday, the Washtenaw County Fair's final weekend. Diane had made plans with her best friend, Jennifer Martinez, to spend the afternoon at the fair. They'd go on rides, eat terrible food, maybe meet up with some boys from school. David Chen had driven both girls to the fairgrounds at 2 p.m., given them each $15, and reminded them he'd pick them up at the main gate at 9 p.m. sharp. "Be careful," Mary had said as Diane climbed out of the car. "Stay together." "We will, Mom," Diane had promised, rolling her eyes with the exasperation only a 17-year-old could muster. Linda Chen hadn't gone to the fair that day. She'd been working her summer job at a local restaurant, pulling double shifts to save money for her upcoming wedding. She'd last seen Diane that morning at breakfast, teasing her about the boy Diane had a crush on, Michael something, a football player Diane was too shy to actually talk to. That morning conversation, mundane, sisterly, full of laughter, would haunt Linda for the rest of her life. Because Diane Chen never made it to the pickup point at 9 p.m. Jennifer Martinez had been there, confused and increasingly worried. She told David Chen that she and Diane had separated around 7:30 p.m. Diane had wanted to try the ring toss booth one more time. She'd been determined to win a stuffed panda. Jennifer had needed to use the bathroom. They'd agreed to meet at the Ferris wheel in 15 minutes. Diane never showed up. Jennifer had searched for an hour, checking all their usual spots, asking carnies and other fairgoers if they'd seen her friend. Nothing. Finally, panicked, she'd gone to the main gate to wait for Mr. Chen, hoping Diane was already there. But Diane was gone. David Chen immediately notified fair security. They made announcements over the loudspeaker. They checked the parking lots. Nothing. At 9:45 p.m., David called the Ypsilanti Police Department. The initial response was frustratingly typical. 17-year-old girls sometimes take off with boys, sometimes lose track of time, probably just wandered off, and will show up embarrassed in a few hours. But the Chen family knew better. Diane wouldn't do that. Diane was responsible. By midnight, when Diane still hadn't returned, the police response escalated. Washtenaw County Sheriff's deputies joined Ypsilanti PD. They sealed the fairgrounds. K-9 units tracked Diane's scent from the ring toss booth, where the operator confirmed a girl matching her description had been there around 7:30, to the parking lot, where the trail went cold. The search expanded through the night. Volunteers poured in, neighbors, church members, fellow students. They walked the fairgrounds inch by inch, flashlights cutting through the darkness, calling Diane's name. One of the volunteer coordinators organizing search parties was Robert James Morrison, 41 years old. Morrison was a familiar face in the community. He worked as an accountant at a firm in Ann Arbor, but dedicated his free time to community service. He volunteered with the county fair every year, helped with youth programs at First Methodist Church, coached Little League baseball. Everyone knew Bob Morrison. Everyone trusted Bob Morrison. He was the first one to suggest expanding the search beyond the fairgrounds. She might have gotten disoriented, Morrison told the search coordinator, his voice full of concern. Maybe wandered into the neighborhood looking for a phone. We should check the streets around the fairgrounds, the parks, anywhere a scared girl might go. It made sense. Teams spread out, covering a 2-mile radius. They found nothing. As dawn broke on August 15th, the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department officially classified Diane Chen as a missing person. Detective James Holland was assigned as lead investigator. The investigation that followed would span years, consume thousands of man-hours, generate dozens of theories, and ultimately go cold, unsolved, unanswered. Another name added to Michigan's growing list of missing persons. But Diane Chen hadn't just vanished. She'd been taken by someone who'd been watching her. Someone who'd approached her at that ring toss booth with a smile and a story. Someone she'd had no reason to fear. Someone who'd taken a photograph with her an hour before she disappeared. then carefully scratched out his own face before the body was even cold. The Washtenaw County Fair covered 40 acres of rides, exhibits, and attractions. On that final Saturday night of summer 1982, an estimated 8,000 people passed through the gates. Finding witnesses who'd seen Diane Chen specifically was like finding needles in a haystack. Detective Holland and his team interviewed hundreds of people over the following weeks. The ring toss operator, a 19-year-old carnival worker named Tommy Briggs, remembered Diane clearly. Asian girl, real pretty, super determined to win that panda, Tommy recalled. She must have spent $5 trying. Kept almost getting it, you know? Finally, around 7:30, she gave up. Said she had to meet her friend soon anyway. Did you see anyone with her? Anyone talking to her? Not that I remember. Fair was packed though. Hard to keep track. Other witnesses provided fragments. A girl matching Diane's description at the cotton candy stand around 7 p.m. Another sighting near the livestock barns around 7:45. A teenage couple thought they'd seen an Asian girl walking toward the parking lot with an older man, but they couldn't be sure of a time or provide a detailed description. Older man could mean anything from 20 to 60. The description was useless. Detective Holland pursued every lead systematically. He interviewed all of Diane's friends, classmates, teachers. Was there a boyfriend her parents didn't know about? Had she been in any trouble? Any reason she might run away? Everyone gave the same answer. Diane was responsible, focused, excited about college. No boyfriend. No trouble. No reason to disappear. He investigated the carnival workers, transients who moved from fair to fair. Did any have criminal records? Several did, petty theft, assault charges. One registered sex offender who wasn't supposed to be within 500 feet of minors. All were questioned intensively. All had alibis or no connection to Diane. He looked at registered sex offenders in Washtenaw County. In 1982, Michigan's sex offender registry was relatively new and incomplete, but Holland tracked down every name. Home visits, interviews, timeline verification. Nothing. The Chen family appeared on local news, pleading for information. Mary Chen sobbed on camera, begging whoever had her daughter to let her go. David Chen offered a $5,000 reward, their entire savings, for information leading to Diane's return. Tips flooded in. Someone claimed they'd seen Diane hitchhiking on I-94 heading toward Detroit. Police chased the lead, false identification. Another caller insisted Diane had run off to California with an older boyfriend. Investigators tracked the story, completely fabricated. A psychic from Lansing contacted police claiming she'd had a vision of Diane near water, surrounded by trees. Search teams focused on local parks, the Huron River, Ford Lake. They dragged the water. They walked wooded areas. Nothing. Weeks became months. The case began to go cold. In November 1982, a hiker found women's clothing in a wooded area near Pinckney State Recreation Area, about 20 miles northwest of Ypsilanti. The clothing matched the description of what Diane had been wearing: denim shorts, a yellow tank top, white sneakers. But there was no body, no blood, no other evidence. Forensic analysis of the clothing found no DNA. The technology didn't exist yet in 1982, but fibers suggested the clothes had been submerged in water, then dried. The location was heavily wooded, near several small lakes and streams. Detective Holland believed Diane had been taken to that area. But without a body, without witnesses, without suspects, the case stalled. David and Mary Chen held a memorial service in 1984, though they refused to officially declare Diane dead for years. The house on Forest Avenue became a shrine, Diane's bedroom unchanged, her swimming trophies still on the shelf, her college acceptance letter from U of M still tacked to her bulletin board. Linda Chen carried guilt she couldn't shake. She'd been working instead of at the fair. If she'd been there, maybe Diane wouldn't have been alone. Maybe she could have protected her sister. The case officially went cold in 1985, until 2013, when Linda Chen took that photograph to be restored. The restored photograph changed everything. When the photo restoration technician at Pixel Perfect Studios in Detroit removed the scratches and revealed the face beneath, Linda Chen had stared at the screen in confused recognition. "I know him," she'd whispered. "That's Bob Morrison. He helped search for Diane." The technician, a 30-year-old named Marcus Webb, who'd seen his share of damaged family photos, felt his instincts prickle. Someone scratched this out on purpose. These marks are deliberate, made with something sharp. Why would someone deliberately deface a photo? Linda's hands had trembled as she held the printout. "I need to take this to the police." On March 18, 2013, 31 years after Diane's disappearance, Linda walked into the Ann Arbor Police Department and requested to speak with someone about the Diane Chen cold case. She was directed to Detective Sarah Zimmerman, a 15-year veteran who specialized in cold cases. Zimmerman had actually reviewed the Chen file 2 years earlier as part of a systematic cold case initiative, but had found no new leads to pursue. "I have new evidence," Linda said, placing the restored photograph on Zimmerman's desk. Zimmerman studied it carefully. "Your sister and an adult male at what looks like the county fair." "Who is he?" "Robert Morrison. He was a volunteer at the fair. He helped organize search parties when Diane went missing." Zimmerman's investigative instincts activated immediately. "And someone deliberately scratched out his face. Where'd you find this photo?" "In a shoebox in my attic. Old family photos. I've had it for 31 years and never really looked at it closely. I just thought the damage was from storage." "When was this taken?" The date stamp says August 14, 1982, the day before Diane disappeared. Zimmerman felt electricity run through her. This was significant. "Ms. Chen, I'm going to need to keep this photo as evidence. And I need you to tell me everything you remember about Robert Morrison." Linda's story poured out. Morrison had been ever present during the search for Diane. He'd organized volunteer shifts, coordinated with police, brought coffee and donuts for searchers. He'd attended Diane's memorial service, had hugged Mary Chen, and told her he wouldn't stop looking. "Where is he now?" Zimmerman asked. "I don't know. I lost touch with him years ago. After the case went cold, he sort of faded away. I think he moved." Zimmerman ran Robert James Morrison through the Michigan State Police database. What she found made her immediately call the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department and the FBI. Robert Morrison, now 72 years old, lived in Traverse City, Michigan, 300 miles north. He'd moved there in 1998, 15 years earlier. But more significantly, Morrison's name appeared in connection with 3 other missing persons cases across Michigan. Karen Phillips, 16, disappeared from the Ionia Free Fair, July 1979. Diane Chen, 17, disappeared from the Washtenaw County Fair, August 1982. Michelle Krakowski, 18, disappeared from the Upper Peninsula State Fair, August 1986. Rebecca Turner, 19, disappeared from the Monroe County Fair, July 1991. For young women, for county fairs. 12 years spanning 1979 to 1991. All unsolved disappearances. And Robert Morrison had been a registered volunteer at every single one of those fairs. Detective Zimmerman immediately contacted the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, and requested a full pattern analysis. What would you have done if you'd found this photograph? Would you have immediately gone to police, or would doubt have held you back? Comment below. Your insights may be featured in our next episode. The task force that formed in March 2013 was a collaborative effort, and Arbor PD, Washtenaw County Sheriff, Michigan State Police, and the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Lead investigator was FBI Special Agent Thomas Crawford, who specialized in serial predators. When he reviewed the pattern for disappearances from Michigan fairs over 12 years, all young women, all unsolved, his assessment was immediate. Serial killer. Fairs are perfect hunting grounds for predators, Crawford explained to the task force. Thousands of people, transient populations, chaotic environments, victims often alone or separated from friends. And a volunteer coordinator? That's the perfect cover. Authority without scrutiny. Access without suspicion. The investigation moved quickly but carefully. They couldn't alert Morrison that he was being investigated. If he had evidence, trophies, or information about victim locations, they needed to secure it before he could destroy it. Surveillance was established on Morrison's home in Traverse City. They watched his patterns, his routines, his contacts. Simultaneously, investigators dug into his background. Robert James Morrison, born 1941 in Flint, Michigan. Served in the Army 1960 to 1964, honorable discharge. Worked as an accountant for various firms across Michigan. Married in 1968 to Judith Morrison, née Patterson. No children. Moved frequently, Flint to Ionia to Ypsilanti to Ann Arbor to Sault Ste. Marie to Monroe, and finally to Traverse City. Each move corresponded with or shortly after one of the fair disappearances. Financial records showed nothing obviously suspicious, no large purchases, no property in remote areas that might hide bodies. But one detail caught investigators' attention. Morrison owned a storage unit in Cadillac, Michigan, about 40 miles from his current home. He'd maintained it since 2002, paying monthly fees automatically. On April 3, 2013, armed with a search warrant, FBI agents and Michigan State Police executed simultaneous raids on Morrison's home in Traverse City and his storage unit in Cadillac. At the home, they found Morrison and his wife Judith. Morrison was calm, almost expecting them. "I suppose this is about the photograph," he said quietly. At the storage unit, they found the answers to 31 years of questions. The storage unit in Cadillac contained horrors. Not bodies, investigators' initial fear, but something almost worse: documentation, evidence, proof. Cardboard boxes stacked neatly, labeled by year. Inside, photographs, newspaper clippings, personal items. The photographs were organized in albums, chronological, meticulous. Young women at fairs, festivals, church events. Smiling, unsuspecting. And, in many photos, Robert Morrison, standing beside them, arm around their shoulders, looking like a friendly volunteer or helpful stranger. Dozens of photographs. Far more than 4 victims. The FBI forensic team cataloged everything. Album 1979, 14 photographs, including 6 of Karen Phillips at the Ionia Free Fair. Karen wearing a blue sundress, eating a corn dog, laughing at something off camera. The last photo showed Karen standing next to Morrison at a ring toss booth. Album 1982, 19 photographs, including 8 of Diane Chen. The cotton candy photo Linda had found was part of a series. Other photos showed Diane at various fair booths, sometimes alone, sometimes with Morrison visible in the background or beside her. Album 1986, 12 photographs, including 5 of Michelle Krakowski at the Upper Peninsula State Fair in Escanaba. Album 1991, 16 photographs, including 7 of Rebecca Turner at the Monroe County Fair. But there were more victims. The albums contained photos of women investigators couldn't immediately identify. Young women at fairs across Michigan dating back to the mid-1970s. In addition to photographs, the boxes contained trophies, jewelry, hair clips, items of clothing. Each carefully bagged, labeled with a first name and date. Karen, July 28, 1979, a silver bracelet. Diane, August 14, 1982, a small jade pendant. Michelle, August 9, 1986, a class ring from Escanaba High School. Rebecca, July 20, 1991, a pair of earrings. And perhaps most chilling, a journal. Handwritten entries documenting his hunts. Not detailed confessions. Morrison was too careful for that, but notes about selections, approaches, and successful acquisitions. The entries were clinical, detached, devoid of empathy. August 14, 1982, selected D at ring toss. Approach successful. Subject trusting. Timing optimal. Special Agent Crawford read the journal with growing horror and professional fascination. He's a classic, organized serial killer. Methodical, patient, able to blend into communities. The volunteer work gave him access and credibility. People trusted him because he was helping. But the storage unit didn't contain the one thing investigators desperately needed: information about body locations. At Morrison's home, FBI behavioral specialists conducted the interrogation. Robert Morrison sat calmly across the table from Special Agent Crawford and Detective Zimmerman. His attorney was present, a public defender who looked overwhelmed. "Mr. Morrison, we've found your collection," Crawford began. "Photographs, trophies, journal entries. We know what you've done. What we need from you now is to tell us where these women are. Their families deserve to bring them home." Morrison's expression didn't change. "I want immunity from the death penalty." "Michigan doesn't have the death penalty," Zimmerman pointed out. "It was abolished in 1846. Federal charges. You're FBI. You could pursue federal kidnapping and murder charges, which carry death penalty. I want that off the table." Crawford glanced at the attorney, then back at Morrison. "We can discuss that with prosecutors. But you need to give us something first. Show good faith. Tell us about Diane Chen." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I took her from the fair. Told her I was with security, that her friend had gotten sick and was at the first aid station. She believed me. Came with me willingly. Once we were in my van, I subdued her." "Where did you take her?" "Pinckney State Recreation Area. There's a small lake, hidden lake, off the main trails. I weighted her body and put her in the deepest part." Zimmerman felt sick but kept her voice steady. "And the others?" "Different locations. I can provide them all, but I want the deal in writing first." The negotiation took 2 days. Prosecutors from the Washtenaw County DA's office, the Michigan Attorney General, and the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Michigan hammered out an agreement. Robert Morrison would provide locations for all victims, testify fully about his crimes, and plead guilty to all charges. In exchange, he'd receive life in prison without parole rather than risk of death penalty under federal statutes. Morrison's attorney advised him to take it. He signed. Over the next week, Morrison provided detailed information about 8 victims. Karen Phillips, buried in a wooded area near the Ionia Fairgrounds. Specific coordinates provided. Diane Chen, Hidden Lake, Pinckney State Recreation Area. Michelle Krakowski, wooded area near Escanaba, specific location provided. Rebecca Turner, buried on private property Morrison had accessed near Monroe. For additional victims from the 1970s and early 1980s, previously unidentified, with body locations provided. Recovery operations began immediately. On April 15, 2013, dive teams entered Hidden Lake in Pinckney State Recreation Area. The lake was small, only about 30 feet deep at its deepest point, but murky with sediment and algae. After 2 days of searching, divers recovered skeletal remains consistent with a young female, along with concrete weights and remnants of rope. Dental records confirmed. Diane Chen had been found. Linda Chen, now 51 years old, collapsed when police gave her the news. 31 years of hoping, searching, wondering, over. Diane was coming home. Over the following months, remains were recovered from all 8 locations Morrison had identified. Forensic anthropology confirmed the identities of 7 victims through dental records and DNA analysis. One set of remains couldn't be positively identified, but was consistent with Morrison's description of a victim from 1977. The trial of Robert James Morrison began in October 2013 in Washtenaw County Circuit Court. Given the multiple jurisdictions involved, prosecutors chose to try Morrison first for Diane Chen's murder, the case that had cracked everything open, with the understanding that additional charges would follow in other counties. Morrison had already pleaded guilty as part of his agreement, so the trial focused on victim impact statements and sentencing recommendations. The courtroom was packed. Families of all 8 victims attended, finally able to face the man who destroyed their lives. Linda Chen took the stand first, her voice shaking but clear. "Robert Morrison didn't just kill my sister. He killed part of our family. My mother never recovered. She lived the rest of her life in a fog of grief. My father blamed himself, died believing he'd failed to protect his daughter. I've spent 31 years with survivor's guilt, wondering if I could have prevented this. And Diane never got to go to college, never got to become the marine biologist she dreamed of being, never got to fall in love or have children or grow old. Morrison stole all of that with his calculated, evil actions. Karen Phillips' mother, now 78 years old, testified about losing her daughter in 1979. For 34 years, I wondered if Karen ran away, if she was alive somewhere, if she'd been taken by someone who kept her prisoner. The not knowing was torture. Now I know she died quickly, Morrison admitted that, and I can finally grieve properly. But I'll never forgive him for the decades he stole from us by staying silent. Michelle Krakowski's father spoke about the searches, the false leads, the hope that slowly died. We searched for Michelle for years. Spent our savings hiring private investigators. Put up flyers across 3 states. And all that time, Morrison knew exactly where she was. He could have ended our suffering with one phone call. But he chose to keep his secret, to protect himself. That's not just murder. That's prolonged torture of surviving families. The most shocking testimony came from Judith Morrison, Robert's wife of 45 years. Judith, 70 years old, took the stand with visible reluctance. Under oath, prosecutors asked the question everyone wanted answered. Mrs. Morrison, when did you first learn about your husband's crimes? Judith's voice was barely audible. 1998. The courtroom erupted. Judge Patricia Foster gavelled for order. 1998, the prosecutor repeated. 15 years ago? You've known for 15 years. Yes. How did you find out? I found the photographs. The albums. I was looking for tax documents in our storage unit, and I found the boxes. I looked through them. I saw the photos of all those girls. I saw Bob in the pictures with them. And I saw the newspaper clippings about them disappearing. What did you do with that information? Judith's tears fell freely now. Nothing. I did nothing. I confronted Bob. He admitted everything. Said he'd stopped, said it was all in the past, said if I turned him in, I'd lose everything. Our home, our savings, our life together. He said the girls were already dead, and nothing I did would bring them back. So I stayed quiet. The courtroom was silent except for Judith's sobs. Mrs. Morrison, do you understand that for 15 years, families were searching for their daughters? That Linda Chen was spending her life savings on private investigators? That mothers and fathers were dying without answers? Yes, I understand. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The prosecutor's next question cut through the room. Are you sorry you didn't come forward, or sorry you got caught? Judith didn't answer. The judge called a recess. When proceedings resumed, prosecutors announced they were charging Judith Morrison as an accessory after the fact, specifically for concealing knowledge of her husband's crimes after 1998. The charges related only to the 15-year cover-up, not the original murders. The legal and moral implications sparked national debate. How culpable was Judith? She hadn't committed the murders. She'd only learned about them years after they occurred. But she'd chosen to protect her husband rather than give families closure. Robert Morrison's sentencing took place on November 15, 2013. Judge Foster's words were measured but forceful. Mr. Morrison, you are a predator of the worst kind. You used positions of trust, volunteer coordinator, community member, church participant, to identify and hunt vulnerable young women. You took 8 lives that we know of, and evidence suggests there may be more. You stole futures, destroyed families, and traumatized entire communities. Your only mercy is that you eventually provided locations so families could bring their daughters home. But that mercy is far too little and far too late. Robert James Morrison was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole, 1 for each confirmed victim. He was 72 years old. He would die in prison. Judith Morrison's case was resolved separately. She pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact and was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. She was released in 2017 after serving 3.5 years, now living under a different name in an undisclosed location. The broader implications rippled through Michigan law enforcement. The Michigan State Police launched a comprehensive review of unsolved missing persons cases from 1970 to 2000, specifically looking for patterns involving fairs, festivals, and community events. They identified 23 additional cases with potential connections to Morrison's methodology. Morrison was interviewed about these cases. He admitted to 3 more murders, bringing his confirmed victim count to 11. The other cases remained unresolved. Either he genuinely wasn't responsible, or he chose not to confess. In 2014, Michigan enacted Diane's Law, requiring criminal background checks and fingerprinting for all volunteers working with minors at public events. The law also mandated coordination between county fair organizations and state police regarding missing persons reports. Several families filed civil lawsuits against county fair organizations, arguing inadequate security and volunteer screening had enabled Morrison's crimes. Most cases settled out of court, with undisclosed amounts paid to victims' families. The Washtenaw County Fair, where Diane Chen had disappeared, implemented comprehensive security overhauls, increased police presence, security cameras throughout the grounds, mandatory check-in systems for unaccompanied minors, and panic buttons at information booths. Diane Chen was laid to rest on May 18, 2013, 31 years after her disappearance, at Washtenaw Memorial Park in Ann Arbor. Her parents weren't there to see it. David had died in 2003, Mary in 2008, both having lived their final years without answers. But Linda Chen and her younger sister Amy were there, along with hundreds of community members, former classmates, and strangers moved by Diane's story. Linda placed a photograph in Diane's casket, not the restored fair photo, but a different one from earlier that summer, showing Diane laughing with her sisters, young and vibrant and alive. "You can rest now," Linda whispered. "We found you. We brought you home." The Diane Chen Memorial Scholarship was established at the University of Michigan in 2014, supporting students pursuing marine biology. The dream Diane never got to fulfill. To date, 17 students have received the scholarship. Karen Phillips, Michelle Krakowski, Rebecca Turner, and the other victims were also finally laid to rest, their families able to grieve with certainty after decades of tortured uncertainty. The photograph that broke the case, Diane smiling with cotton candy, standing next to the man who would kill her hours later, became evidence in the trial, but was eventually returned to Linda Chen. She keeps it in a locked box now, unable to display it, but unable to destroy it. "It's the last picture of my sister alive," Linda said in a 2015 interview. "I hate what it represents, but it's also proof that she existed, that she was real, that she mattered." Linda has become an advocate for cold case investigations and victim support. She speaks at law enforcement conferences, pushing for better resources for unsolved cases and better support systems for families of missing persons. "For 31 years, I lived in limbo," Linda tells audiences. "Not knowing is its own kind of hell. You can't grieve properly because there's always hope. You can't move on because there's always a question. Cold cases don't just affect the victims, they affect everyone who loved them. Every unsolved case is a family trapped in time." Robert Morrison remains imprisoned at the Oaks Correctional Facility in Manistee, Michigan. Now 83 years old and in declining health, he's granted few interviews. In a 2019 interview with a forensic psychologist studying serial offenders, Morrison was asked why he'd kept the photographs and trophies, evidence that ultimately convicted him. "I needed them," Morrison said simply. "Without documentation, it was like they never existed. Like it never happened. The photographs proved it was real." "But didn't you understand that keeping evidence would eventually lead to your capture?" Morrison smiled, a chilling expression devoid of warmth. "I never thought I'd be caught. I was careful. I moved when I needed to. I was patient. The only mistake I made was underestimating technology, that photo restoration. Without that, no one would have ever known." "Do you feel remorse?" Morrison considered the question. "I feel regret that I was caught. As for the girls, they were necessary. I don't expect you to understand." The psychologist's report concluded that Morrison exhibited classic psychopathic traits: lack of empathy, grandiosity, inability to form genuine emotional connections. His community involvement wasn't altruism, it was camouflage and hunting ground. The case has been featured extensively in true crime media. a 2-hour 2020 special multiple podcasts, a book by journalist Sarah Mitchell titled The Fair Volunteer, How Robert Morrison Hunted Michigan's County Fairs. Each retelling brings renewed attention to the case and occasionally generates new leads. In 2018, a woman in Ohio contacted Michigan State Police claiming her sister, who disappeared from a traveling carnival in 1976, might be another Morrison victim. The investigation is ongoing. Judith Morrison's role remains controversial. Some view her as a victim herself, an elderly woman trapped in fear, dependent on her husband, unable to see a way out. Others see her as complicit, someone who chose comfort over justice, who allowed families to suffer needlessly for 15 years. In 2020, Judith gave her only interview, speaking to a Detroit Free Press reporter. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I should have come forward in 1998. But I was scared not just of losing my home or my security, but of confronting the truth that I'd spent 30 years married to a monster. How do you reconcile that? How do you accept that the man you slept beside, ate meals with, built a life with, how do you accept that he's capable of such evil? It was easier to tell myself it was in the past, that coming forward wouldn't help anyone. I was wrong. I hope someday the families can forgive me, but I don't deserve their forgiveness." The detective who solved the case, Sarah Zimmerman, retired from Ann Arbor Police Department in 2020 after a distinguished career. She's consulted on dozens of cold cases since, bringing the same methodical approach that cracked the Diane Chen case. "The Morrison case taught me that evidence doesn't expire," Zimmerman said at her retirement ceremony. That photograph sat in a shoebox for 31 years. The storage unit sat in Cadillac for over a decade. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes justice is just waiting for the right person to look at old evidence with new eyes. Linda Chen, now 62, continues her advocacy work. She's pushed for legislation requiring states to periodically review cold cases using new technology, DNA analysis, facial recognition, digital enhancement of old photographs. Technology changes, Linda says. What couldn't be analyzed in 1982 can be analyzed now. What looked like meaningless damage on a photograph can be restored to reveal a killer's face. We owe it to every victim and every family to never stop looking, never stop trying, never stop pursuing justice. The photograph, scratched deliberately, hidden carelessly, restored accidentally, became the key that unlocked 31 years of secrets. Sometimes justice arrives through dogged investigation, sometimes through forensic breakthroughs, and sometimes impossibly devastatingly, thankfully, through a sister's decision to digitize old family photos and a technician's expertise in restoring what someone tried so hard to erase. Diane Chen smiled in that photograph, holding cotton candy, standing next to a man she had no reason to fear. Hours later, she'd be gone. 31 years later, that same photograph would speak from a grave, pointing to her killer, ensuring he'd never hurt anyone again. The shadow in the photograph became the light that exposed a predator hiding in plain sight for 3 decades. If Diane's story moved you, if it reminded you that cold cases deserve our attention and families deserve closure, then subscribe to Untold Cold Case Files. Share this video to honor Diane and the 10 other victims Robert Morrison took. Every view keeps their memory alive. Every share might reach someone with information about another unsolved case. Drop a comment and tell me, how do you feel about Judith Morrison's 15-year silence? Was she a victim or an accomplice? And if you have old photographs or evidence from unsolved cases, consider having them analyzed with modern technology. You might be holding the key to justice. 31 years. One photograph. Justice finally served.